Caitlin Huey-Burns is a reporter for RealClearPolitics, and she joins me now. Caitlin, good to see you.
Good to see you too.
So much to get to. Let's start with Betsy DeVos. Why has she become such the lightning rod for Democrats? Because initially we were talking about opposition across the board. Rex Tillerson, for instance, was someone that Democrats were talking about his ties to Russia. But why Betsy DeVos?
Exactly. It is kind of a surprising pick. Secretary of Education becoming the most controversial cabinet nominee, but it has happened for a couple of different reasons. One, education is something that's really personal for people. Look at your Facebook feed, as I'm sure, and I have looked at mine. You see from teachers, from parents, from all across the political spectrum, people really engaged in this. Also, she has some controversies of her own, and also she represents a lot of what Donald Trump has pledged to drain in terms of this draining the swamp message, right? She's a longtime Republican donor, part of the party, very wealthy, comes from a wealthy family. And you know, you saw in her confirmation hearings, Bernie Sanders asked if she would have gotten this job, gotten this nomination without those connections. She said no. She said yes, it didn't. These connections weren't the reason. But it kind of embodies, at least for Democrats, what they say that Trump campaigned against.
All right, so hence the opposition we're seeing. On another topic here, let me ask you, Caitlin, on this issue of the address at CENTCOM at MacDill Air Force Base, President Trump appeared to suggest without evidence that when terror attacks happen, the media does not report them, that in fact the media covers them up, essentially. Now, we heard from Sean Spicer that he's going to be providing later on a list to support some of the president's assertions, but I'm wondering, what's the broader strategy here? Is there one, you think, Caitlin?
Yeah, I don't think there's a broader strategy here. I don't think the White House intended today to announce, we think the press is covering up terrorist activity. I think what happens is that Donald Trump is looking for public support for some of the things that he's been trying to enact. He's seen mixed polling as it pertains to the Muslim ban, although there has been support for it in the past. And he's facing this kind of battle of people not liking him and not liking what his policies are, what he's trying to do, if you look at the broader polling. So I think it's a way, in some ways, to kind of justify why he took such swift action, because the administration has come under fire from Democrats and Republicans for pushing the executive order as it pertains to immigration and refugees too quickly, doing it without the messaging components, doing it without consulting the necessary people involved. And so I think this was a way for him to kind of justify that, saying, you guys aren't reporting how, what's going on out here. This is why I needed to do it. I think that's kind of the tangent that he went on today. But then the White House has to come back and back it up with specific examples. And they didn't have any of those off the cuff today.
Yeah, we continue to wait for those. And for the record, the White House has continued to say that this executive order is not a Muslim ban, but it's a ban that affects citizens from 7 Muslim-majority countries.
Right.
Let's turn to another issue. In an interview with Fox during the Super Bowl pregame show, President Trump was asked about his promise of a new health care plan. Let's go ahead and take a listen to that.
Can Americans in 2017 expect a new health care plan rolled out by the Trump administration this year?
Yeah, in the process, and maybe it'll take till sometime into next year, but we are certainly going to be in the process. Very complicated. Obamacare is a disaster. You have to remember, Obamacare doesn't work. So we are putting in a wonderful plan. It's statutorily takes a while to get. We're going to be putting it in fairly soon. I think that, yes, I would like to say by the end of the year, at least the rudiments, but we should have something within the year and the following year.
So, Caitlin, I remember talking to Trump supporters on the Mall on the day of his inauguration who wanted Obamacare done. They wanted it repealed immediately. They wanted it replaced. They just were not happy with it, and that was one of their primary reasons for supporting President Trump. This is significant, though, this timetable shift.
This is significant, and remember when he gave his first press conference as president-elect, he said he wanted to do this very quickly, repeal and replace simultaneously and as quickly as possible. He even put a time frame around having it done around the time that Tom Price, his Secretary for Health and Human Services would be confirmed. That still hasn't happened yet around that nomination. So the timeline has shifted, but it's also representative of the political conflicts that Republicans are facing when wanting to repeal this law, not only repeal it, but replace it with something new. They haven't coalesced around a plan. The president has not really taken, has not led exactly on introducing a plan that everybody can kind of get around. He hasn't released details about exactly what he would want to do. And Republicans that I've talked to on Capitol Hill say, they don't want to repeal anything without having something to replace it with. You also have, Republican governors across the country that have expanded Medicaid in their states and say that it's working pretty successfully. They want to ensure that people on Medicaid in their states aren't ripped away from this. So there's a lot of political complications here, and Republicans and President Trump are coming to terms with the reality of what this means. So I think you're going to kind of continue to see this timeline extended, and I wouldn't be surprised if Congress, took some menial steps in terms of, maybe repealing the law and phasing in changes, or actually just making fixes and kind of packaging them together as replacements.
Yeah, but it's certainly more complex when you're actually
Absolutely.
in office trying to implement these changes.
Absolutely.
All right, also over the weekend, the New York Times reported, Caitlin, that in reaction to negative headlines over the travel ban, the president will be read in on executive orders earlier, and a quote-unquote 10-point checklist has been created for any new initiatives. What do you make of that reported shift in protocol? I mean, that sounds more in line with what one would expect of a traditional administration.
Right. It's really interesting to see kind of the growing pains taking place. And remember, the president does not have his entire team in place in terms of White House staff, but also in terms of cabinet, all of these agencies, lots of jobs that are not really in the spotlight have not been filled yet. What was interesting about this article, too, is that it said that the president did not really know what was in these executive orders, which means, he wasn't briefed exactly on all the details. I'm not sure, to the extent to which he asked for a detailed briefing on what was in them. But that's also something that I think was really startling, that he was signing these executive orders without exactly knowing all the details in place. So there are growing pains, but these growing pains are having, real life implications for people. I think that the president is having a little bit of a civics lesson, so to speak, seeing that the feedback from the judges, for example, seeing people at the airports getting stopped immediately. And so I think the White House is having to contend with the real life implications of this.
Well, to follow up on your point about the article saying President Trump not necessarily being fully read in on what was in those executive orders, including the executive order that he signed giving Steve Bannon a seat on the National Security Council, Mr. Trump tweeted Monday, "I call my own shots." But this is someone who has been used to operating as a CEO does and running his company in the way that he sees fit and not really having to, frankly, consult necessarily with other people.
Right.
How do you see that relationship between Steve Bannon and President Trump as he navigates his way through this presidency?
Well, I think that's a really great point, that this is a completely different job for Donald Trump. And we haven't really had this kind of thing before, where a complete outsider businessman wins the presidency and becomes president. And so we're seeing what that looks like, not only for the public, but for the president himself, kind of contending with things that he couldn't do in his old job and things that he has to do in this job. And so the relationship with Bannon and Trump is something that has caught not only the eyes and ears of people that follow politics closely, but the general public. I mean, Saturday Night Live is making skits around Steve Bannon repeatedly. The one this past weekend was particularly interesting, I guess. And so he's become kind of this public figure, and he actually was on the cover of Time magazine himself, seen to have, portrayed as someone who is kind of really pulling the strings at the White House. And so it's a really interesting relationship, but we saw it on the campaign trail, and it's not something that is necessarily going to go away. So I'm kind of looking to see how Trump navigates that, and also relationships with other people on staff. Reince Priebus, chief of staff, who doesn't really have experience in the White House, right? His experience is at the RNC. He hasn't had to contend with a lot of these issues himself.
Yeah, it's all fascinating to watch these dynamics unfold. Caitlin Huey-Burns of RealClearPolitics. So good to have you on set in person. Thanks so much.